All right, awesome. So good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday. Thank you again for joining us for another one of our Thursday morning weekly webinars. We really appreciate having folks join us every single week. We're really excited about today and to have Margot Lester talk about some writing for advocacy with us this morning. It's a great presentation. I'm really glad so many folks have joined us. Wanted to do a couple of quick announcements before we get started. Just a reminder that we will continue to do these webinars every Thursday morning at 10 a.m. For the foreseeable future, as long as we are staying home and staying healthy and safe. So next week we have our Fighting Religious and Moral Exemptions to Care and Reproductive Health Care. We are going to be joined with some folks from Harvard and some folks from Planned Parenthood. So it's going to sure to be a super informative webinar for next week. So make sure that you join us for that. We'll be sending out the link to that in the chat function and in our follow-up email today. We will also be sending out a link to a sign-on letter that we've created around HIV advocacy for COVID-19 for the House Select Committee. So feel free to share that with your network. We would super appreciate it if you would sign on to that letter and share with the folks in your network as well. So that'll be in the chat function and in the follow-up email. And now I am happy to introduce and turn things over to Margot Lester to talk about writing for advocacy. This is a great presentation that I've had the opportunity to see a couple times. So y'all are in for a real treat with one of our dear friends and advocates, Margot Lester. So Margot, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks, Lee. It's nice to see some familiar faces in the gallery today. It's always validating when people come back to a workshop they've had before, and it's great to see some new faces too. This is the presentation that I frequently give at the annual conference, and I give it a lot of other places too. There are some handouts that you can get if you want a set of examples of successful letters to the editor and other kinds of opinion writing, and you want to get downloadable versions of the strategy I'm going to show you today, you can go to bit.ly right to advocate. So that's bit.ly/W right #2 A advocate. And I think that Lee and Matt are going to put that in the chat screen as well. Awesome. So you can download it there and share with your friends. This is all stuff that the more we can get other people involved in doing this, the better. Today, we're really going to focus on all kinds of opinion writing, but put our real emphasis on letters to the editor. That's a place we know has impact. I know we all think, who reads the paper anymore? But the answer is a lot of the elected officials and policymakers absolutely pay attention to what's in there. It also, all of the newspapers publish their letters online. So it creates an easy opportunity for people to find out what people are thinking about, whether or not they pick up the paper. So that's still a really relevant way. But again, this can be used for something as short as a letter to the editor or something as big as an opinion essay. So I'm going to flip over and start the presentation. If you guys have any questions, you can throw them in the chat. I'm going to rely on Matt or Lee to let me know if there are any questions that I should answer in line. I'm going to be flexible about that, you guys. Sorry we didn't talk about that ahead of time. So if you want to bust in with a question, because I can't see it while I'm also showing you my screen. So let's see if this works. Share screen, keynote, play. Did it work? Let's see. Oh, hang on. Oh, there's the share. All right, nope, hang on, y'all, sorry. There we go. Now let's play. Yay, technology. Who knew? So if you come to any of my workshops over the last 10 jillion years, you recognize this first slide, but it still holds relevance for me because this is how it feels right now, right? We are just getting so many messages thrown at us at any one time. I still can't believe that this is a real car, but I think it is. And so the key for us today is to figure out, how do we capture the power of those ideas we have so that other people can hear them, so that they really stand out from all of this other stuff that's going on out in the world. So we want to be able to make our point, make it fast, and make it matter. That's how we're going to get the traction we need for people to start changing their minds and behaviors and make decisions that are going to benefit our community. I don't know about y'all, but this is how I feel. Like there's so much I want to talk about. I want to talk about blood donation. I want to talk about Medicaid expansion. I want to talk, right? I've got so many things, and I like having a little tool that I can use so that I can respond to requests to do stuff like that really fast. And that's where we are now. So today what we're going to do is understand the traits of good opinion and persuasive writing so that we can lean into those a little harder as we produce our own stuff. I'm going to show you a quick strategy that I use all the time. Lee and Matt asked me to do a letter to the editor the other week, and I pulled out this strategy to make sure I was clear on what I was going to do. We'll talk about some of the channels we can use to get this information out there. And we will, at the end of this, hopefully you guys will come out with a draft that you could actually start workshopping to send something out that captures your ideas. Persuasive writing is writing that builds support, educates and informs, influences opinion and policy, and changes minds and behaviors. It's a really important opportunity for us when we can write to advocate to make all kinds of progress on what we want. So what I'd like to do is, if you can just type in the chat how you describe effective, persuasive, and opinion writing. If you think about times that you have been moved by something that somebody wrote, or that you got traction for for an idea that you had. Let's talk about what makes that effective. What are some of the traits there? I'll give you a couple minutes to throw those in. I will tell you while you're typing that I have been doing this workshop for almost 20 years now, and the traits are always the same. So we really do know what's going on here. Let me see if I can actually, oops. So here are the traits that I have. Matt or Lee, do you want to chime in with some of the things that people put in the chat? If they did, I can't see the chat, unfortunately.
Yeah, so we've got some folks that have said facts that support and prove the argument, writing that is clear, concise, relatable, drawing people in to give them understanding, good storytelling, stories that move, local examples, and personal stories are always powerful.
Ooh, local examples and personal stories. I'm going to add that to my list. That's a good one. And I hadn't really thought about putting it that succinctly. So whoever that was, kudos to you. So as you can see, a lot of what you guys typed in, we already have here. And these, if you just if you want to screenshot this, or like I said, I will, I think I can post a link later to the slide deck if you want it, or you can just email me at Margot, M-A-R-G-O-T, @thewordfactory.com. So now let's talk a little bit about what frustrates you, generally about writing, but also about this particular version. I know there are a lot of things that, that catch us. For me, it's often just, I have so many feelings, I'm not sure where to start. You know, what's the most important thing? So think a little bit about what frustrates you. And the reason I think that's important is just so that we can get it out of the way. We can acknowledge, I feel cranky about writing because, or I think this is hard because, and Matt, if anybody chimes in with some reasons, you can share those with us. But excuse me, I feel like admitting what's hard allows us to get past what's hard. So like I said, for me, it's just finding the right idea and the details that I think are most relevant. Whatever your pain is, this strategy is going to help you ease it so you don't feel like your head is caught in a vice. Here's the strategy I use. You may notice if you've come to this before that it's got a different name. It still looks exactly like the content purpose audience strategy, but we had some intellectual property issues within our, not issues, but opportunities within our company for me to brand this stuff for the Word Factory. So it's now called the People, Ideas, and Goals. And if you know me, you know I love bacon, and therefore it's the pig. So the place to start when we're doing any kind of opinion or persuasive writing is always with the people. I know we want to think it's with our ideas, but we have to know who we're trying to go after and what they're concerned about. That's the best way for us to make sure we're speaking in a way that resonates with them and answers the questions or concerns they have. That's right. That's the key to getting people to move. So who are we trying to reach? What are their questions, their concerns or fears, objections they may have to the ideas that we're putting forth? And then thinking about, so you want to write those down, think about those and write them down. And then who would they trust? What's a voice that they want to hear from on this? That way we can figure out how to couch do our word choice and our sentence fluency. So if you want to play along at home, you can just draw a giant line down the middle of a piece of paper, or you can make, type out some stuff. I like doing it on paper, and I'll tell you in a few minutes. But here's what we're looking for, right? The audience. Who are you writing for? This is not a demographic thing like people 35 and older. This would be something a little bit more specific. People who are who get caught in the gap for Medicaid and need Medicaid expansion, right? Or something like that. Or you're writing for legislators who can write the legislation to expand Medicaid. And maybe even more specifically, it's the people who are not wanting to do that, right? The people we need to move. And then why do we think they're, do they not have enough information? What are they afraid of? What are the yeah buts they always give us? Getting that written down early allows us to decide what we need to put in the piece to get their attention and to overcome those objectives. Y'all have heard this a million times, but when I was in junior high, there was this cute boy named T-Bird Julian. That was really his name. And T-Bird was, he had like a jean jacket and long blonde hair, and he was, he smoked cigarettes. And so moms everywhere lived in fear that T-Bird Julian would show up at a party. But he was in 9th grade and I was in 7th grade. And I was like, Mom, there's no way T-Bird Julian is ever going to show up at a 7th grade party. But she didn't buy that. So I learned when I wanted to go to a party, that one of the first things I should say is, Mom, I want to go to this party. T-Bird Julian is not on the guest list. He is not going to come by. And then I just got over that hurdle ahead of time, and I could go on and tell her answer all her other questions. This is also where we want to do the writer's personality. Now that we know who these people are, who do they trust? Who do they want to hear from? Someone living, if you have direct experience of what you're trying to advocate for, that's always super helpful. It could be that you are a constituent. A lot of times as an ally, when I'm writing people, I just let them know, an elected official, like, hey, I can vote for you or not. And I do vote. The next place we want to go, once we've figured out who we're writing to and what their concerns are, is what we want to say. And you notice now that we're doing it through the lens of who they are. And that's going to, again, allow us to focus on their needs. What's the most important thing we want them to know? This is the hardest part for us as the writer. We have so many things we want to tell people. We've got to pick one main idea. That's why it's the main idea. And that's, again, why I think starting with the people first, that's a filter that helps us throw out some of the other ideas. Things that are important to us are important, but they may not be important in the context of what you're writing right here for the audience that you're going to. So one main idea, the details that you need to support that. This could be things that answer their questions, fears, and objections, or not. Sometimes you can't answer them all in one piece. So you want to pick, again, the ones that really give the most support to that main idea. And then what examples, explanations, and evidence can you provide? People who are ready to make a decision, but they just want validation. And that's where things like evidence can really, facts can really come in handy. We all love to lean on data, at least I do. That is not helpful for people who don't know much about an issue. It doesn't hurt them, but it's not going to move them. We all know this. I've been told for most of my life that if I exercised more and ate less, and I have all this data as I get older on how that would make me a healthier person, and I am still not necessarily doing all that because I'm not moved by the data. So when you are closer, when you know someone's thinking about it and they just want to make sure they're making the right decision, data makes a big difference. Examples are huge. That's like with the trait that somebody listed earlier. Local stories, personal stories, letting people, right? That's an example that people can really relate to because there's something there for them. There's a little story. Explanations talk about how and why. That's often important for people who don't quite understand the issue. Maybe they don't understand why we need Medicaid expansion, and what are a few explanations you can tell them, this is why that's important, or this is how that would work. So again, now you've got the topic that you're going to write about, your main idea, and your examples, and you just jot those down. If you're playing at home, these should be bullet points. Your main idea if possible, should be a complete sentence, just so you're sure that it's a complete thought. But the support right now, you just want to, you could say something like data on blood shortages, or data on people who need additional support from Medicaid, right? You could have that. You could say, grab that example from Lee, so that you're just shorthanding it right now. This is a way to gather your ideas, make sure you have the right ones. This is also a great time to run it by somebody else who has knowledge of the audience or the issue, or both. They can look at your main idea and support and help you decide if you've got the right ones. Again, this is where it's the hardest thing for me, is what of all the things that I care about, what are the probably 4 or 5 things? I would say for support, you really only need 3 to 5. And on a letter to the editor, you probably need 2 to 3, right? Letters to the editor are about 250 words. So you've got to really choose carefully. And that's why this particular part of the strategy is really important, because it can help you narrow that down. I know I'm going super fast. Are there any questions so far about choosing your audience or figuring out what it is you want to write about in the context of them? I'll give you a moment and have some coffee. Okay.
And I think folks can certainly use the chat function, but if you also just want to ask your question, feel free to unmute yourself as well. Obviously, ask that folks try to stay on mute if you're not talking.
Good tip, Lee, thanks. So now we've got the people we're going after, the questions, concerns, and objections they have, and a voice that we think they want to hear from. We've got the idea, our topic, and then that most important thing, and a few examples, pieces of evidence, and explanations that are going to help build that out. So if all you had was those 2 blocks, you'd do great. And in fact, if all you had was main idea and support, you'd be okay, right? But the more that we can, and I know this feels like if I'm saying a letter to the editor is 250 words, you're thinking, well, this is a lot of work. You're going to have more than 250 words probably on your organizer, but this is the best way to make sure that the words that ended up in your piece are the most powerful and potent ones. And that's what we need to move people and for our voices to stand out in that crowd. So the next thing we want to do is think about our purpose really clearly. What do we need people to, what actions or feelings or thoughts do we want them to have after they do this? What do we want to see happen from this? Obviously, it could be we want you to vote yes or no on a particular piece of legislation. We want you to do research on something. We want you to, when we were doing a lot of the stuff a couple years ago on Stigma Stops Here, or supporting PrEP, or any of that stuff, what do we want them to think, feel, or do, and what do we want the outcome to be as well? What are the bigger outcome that we're working toward? There we go. So again, here's another handy T-chart. These are calls to action, right? And what I like about these is it allows us to break up something you could do, call your representative or vote a certain way, versus how we want people to think or feel. I always want people to think I'm smart and right, and I don't mind putting that over there. But I also want them to feel like I know, right, I know what I'm talking about, that they feel like this is something they could be proud to do, for instance. That would be a good one, or that this is going to matter, or this is more important than I thought. All of those things are legitimate, and it's important for us to remember that people like to feel like they have some tangible goal, right? We want them to help us achieve something. You may not always have a do, especially if you're writing an opinion piece. You may not need them to do something if you're trying to educate them or open their eyes or share a different perspective. Then it really does come down to think or feel. I guess the do could be think or feel differently, but there may not be a specific ask for, reaching out to take a real action. So what I'd like to do is give you just a couple seconds. If you haven't been playing at home, run through really quick and see if you can fill this out. If you've got an idea that you care about, And because I would love it if we could really get something started for you here. Does anybody want to put in the chat function or unmute yourself and let us know if you have a topic that you'd like to talk about or that you're working on? Maybe, maybe not. We need some like hold music while people are writing. I think Lee figured out how to do that on the last call. I can't remember. All right, so I'm gonna walk through really quick the ways that you can use this, because it's nice to have this organizer. Again, if you're doing this, if you work in an organization or if you're doing this for NCAN, and you want to make sure that you're on the right track, it is great to share your organizer. That's something that Lee and I have done a couple times, where I'll pull something together really quick, and before I start writing, just say like, hey, am I on the right track here? Am I missing any information you think is important?
So I'll share, we've gotten 2 topics folks have shared in the group chat. The first is about access to HIV testing in the age of COVID, which I think is a big thing we're talking about a lot and would love to think about how to lift up. And then someone else mentioned prisoner advocacy during COVID, which I think is a really excellent, important topic.
Those are great topics. And so who would the audience be, if you don't mind continuing to use the chat? Who's the audience for each of those topics? And do we think, what do you think is, well, I'll just ask the audience question. Who are you guys trying to reach at those 2 points, whoever those great ideas were? All right.
I can, while folks are sort of chatting, Omar just responded. So HIV testing audience would be public health and health systems.
Right.
And I think that's actually a really sort of significant topic. You know, we've been thinking about how we can sort of lift up how COVID is maybe making us have to think about some new priorities when it comes to healthcare delivery, but also probably illuminating like things that weren't working great already. And I do think trying to sort of put campaigns to get like local health departments or our state division of communicable disease to prioritize like at-home testing or new testing models feels like something really to lift up right now.
Yeah. Are there any other topics, Lee, that you guys are sort of looking at now that maybe need a different kind of attention or are new that we might just want to share with the group while we've got some people here?
Yeah, I'm happy. So we are certainly really interested, I think, within the next couple of weeks about lifting up messages about the importance of Medicaid expansion. That's probably not a surprise to folks. We've all been talking about Medicaid expansion for the better part of a decade now. Dante Prayer on our team wrote a letter to the editor that was in the Charlotte Observer a couple weeks ago about Medicaid expansion. And with the General Assembly coming back into session next week, you know, I think it's going to be tough, candidly, but I think it's just still really, really important that we keep beating this drumbeat. Because I also think even if we can't get Medicaid expansion this year, it helps sort of define that as a topic and a narrative for who gets elected in November. And, you know, we certainly would hope that sort of pro-Medicaid expansion policymakers are in Raleigh. Yeah.
Excellent. So I think we've got Medicaid expansion, we've got advocating for prisoners, we've got access to treatment and care during the time of COVID. Those are all really good topics. If you don't have a topic at home and you're looking for one, here we go. And I know that the folks at NCAN would be happy if you want to write something, just drop them a line and let them know, and they'd be happy to work with you both on figuring out a good topic and an angle for that. So now that we've got our strategy filled out, hopefully, let's talk about how to write it. Because I think that's the other part that sometimes hangs us up. Now we've got all these ideas on a page, but what do I do? Here's the truth. If all you did was work across your organizer and make your main idea your first sentence and then bullet point out in other sentences, or if you're doing something longer, a paragraph, your support, and then put your call to action at the end, your life is going to be good. And for a letter to the editor in particular, this may be the easiest structure to get started. You can also, one tactic that I like to use a lot, and I'm trying not to use it so much anymore because I overused it, but it can be really effective, is to start with a question or start with one of the objections, like the T-Bird-Julian objection, right? Lead with that to get people's attention. By the way, T-Bird-Julian, I have seen him and told him I used him in this workshop, and he is thrilled to know that his reputation lives on almost 50 years later. So starting with a question or objection, particularly if you're writing to an audience who isn't necessarily with you right now and you're trying to move them over to what you care about, can really get their attention because they relate to it immediately, right? They're like, yeah, I don't think this is a good idea because here's my objection. Then you use a detail to address or answer that. Then you can start with your big idea. What's that main thing you want them to know? And then follow through and finish at the end with your purpose. There are some other things here. Other thing I want to talk about really quick on the organization is we obsess when we're writing about getting everything right the first time. I need to write this and it has to be great. That's just not true. We are not writing in school anymore. It was true in school, or at least it felt like it was true in school. We need to write to get stuff out of our head. That's why we do the pre-writing strategy. But then we also need to take all of that stuff out of that good thinking we've done on pre-writing and get it into something we can work with. Your draft does not have to be good. It just has to be on the page so that you have the ideas in a way that you can work with them. So that's another reason that this first organizational structure is a really easy one to start with. It lets you see what's there, and then maybe you do move it around a little bit. I often will try, I'll get this draft done, and then my revisions will be trying different orders or different techniques. So take some pressure off yourself. This is part of what we feel about the I can't even get started or I get writer's block. It's because we're so worried about making it good, like right out of our fingertips. Just not necessary. I'm going to tell you, remember, I'm a professional writer. I write all day. And you don't want to see some of the first drafts. They are not pretty. But that's what they're for. That's where you get all the ugly out. And then you can start making things more beautiful. Revision also, by the way, on shorter pieces is even more important because you have such little space to get stuff out there. You want to make sure it's the best. You know, you've got the best words, you've got the best sentence structure. It's in an order that people can follow. So we do a lot more work to write short well, unfortunately, but it's because it has such huge impact. It's so potent because it's in such a tiny little package. Speaking of tiny little packages, letters to the editor are so important, and they are generally the same. It does vary a little bit outlet to outlet. So you want to check on their webpage to see exactly what their requirements are. But in most cases, it's 250 to 300 words. That is probably a couple of paragraphs. If you think of a page that is, an 8.5 by 11 page that is at, let's say, 12 point times Roman single space, that's about 500 words. So I will also say you get no penalties, unlike in school, no penalties for coming in under their word count. They do not mind, the shorter is fine. So that's, just don't go over. Going over is it's very unusual unless you are somebody in the community who has a big reputation. It is very unusual for them to do the word count any higher for you. And they just won't tell you that, they just won't ring your piece. So don't go over whatever they want, but feel free to be much shorter. The one I wrote last week, I think, came in at 175 words, but we felt like it said what it needed to say. So the other thing is that very often preference is given to people with local connections. So that's why you'll often see, if you're filling out an online form or if you look at their submission guidelines, they tell you they want to know your address. They're not going to publish it. But they might publish, like when I write for the News and Observer, they do put Carborough, but they want to make sure that you have a local connection, because they also know, as we pointed out in the earlier thing, people want to read from people they know or people in their community. In some cases, they will ask for exclusivity. That means if you submit your letter to the editor until they tell you they're not going to run it, you can't submit it anywhere else. That's kind of outmoded in the age of the internet, but as we know, newspapers don't always stay up on the latest internet trends. What I would suggest in that case, if you don't want to wait, because it can take a while unless it's a super time sensitive issue, is to do different versions of it. You can have, the topic doesn't have to be different, just the words that you have to do. So you may do 1 or 2 different versions. I will say something that's not on here, but now there are so many people writing letters to the editor and opinion essays and things related to COVID-19 that there is a sort of a backlog. So having a piece that has a really interesting point of view and a clear voice is going to make a big difference to cutting through again. So now it's not just that the readers or the listeners have tons of messages coming at them, but the people who are deciding what gets published or aired are also getting tons of things at them. A lot of times letters to the editor is kind of a desert and they're happy to get anything. Right now is not one of those times. So you really want to put the effort into making this great. I will tell you that anyone on this webinar, if you would like me to look over anything you write, I am here. I'm happy to do it. It's free. You can just send it to me. Again, it's Margot, M-A-R-G-O-T, @thewordfactory.com, and just put like NCAN in the subject line or something so I pay attention. But I think this is a great opportunity with the topics that we're talking about that are important and are not being discussed as much. It will really help cut through the COVID-19 flood of stuff, because these topics aren't getting a ton of attention, and that's going to make the opinion page editors feel really good about it. So you've got local, regional, and national magazines, newspapers, and broadcast stations. It is worth sending what your opinion piece to like the radio station or the TV station. I know that a lot of them don't do opinion segments, but it allows them to see that there's something going on in the community that they might want to do coverage on. So it's a really good idea to say this is important because, and then you might be able to influence the coverage that they give, or they may want to interview you as a source for a story they're doing on the topic. So it's totally worth it to hang in there with broadcast stations. Lots of people are doing podcasts now. Those are also important. Some of them are hosted by media outlets, which is always great. Again, showing them that you have an opinion and that you have good support for it and a strong voice makes you an excellent opportunity to be a podcast guest, where again, you can go on and advocate for these things that you think about. There are, of course, advocacy blogs and social accounts, Q Notes, AIDS United has a big one. They're, NCAN, so send your stuff there. Live events are always really good. And your own social media channels. There's plenty of space. It can be a little challenging on Twitter, but now it's easier to thread. Put your stuff out there. Put it on your Facebook page. Put it on these other places. We don't always anymore have to wait for the newspaper or the radio or TV station. So there's plenty of opportunity for you to get stuff out there. That was super fast. I'm wondering if we have any questions or if people have any concerns. I did see a couple of things pop up in the chat. So anything we want to address while we're on here live together?
We just did have one person mention in the chat, and I see Latoya and Dante been writing back and forth, just raised up that my area does not have a lot of resources for HIV and AIDS, and it feels like it's discussed, and interest in learning more and maybe using an opportunity to write a letter to the editor to raise awareness about HIV and AIDS, which is fabulous.
That is awesome. And it does also show them that there is local interest in it. And that, again, can drive coverage. And it gives you an opportunity. One of the things that I notice is if you write a good letter to the editor, and it is in a situation like we're talking about here where there's not a lot out there, it can often lead to an invitation to write something longer, which is really great. Then you get the space. A lot of times the opinion essays are between 500 and 750 words. So you get plenty of time to include a lot of good examples, evidence, and explanations. So absolutely, this could be the catalyst. Even a short piece can really move things on. You'll see on the screen that I've got the Right to Advocate link here. If you want more tips in general on writing, I have a blog. I only post once a week, so it's not going to, overwhelm you. You can subscribe to it, or you can just go through really slowly at your own pace and see what else is on there. I know I'm finishing up super early, but I wanted to make sure we left time just for any general discussions you guys have, any troubleshooting. If you want some tips or advice that we didn't cover that are beyond just writing, I'm happy to take those questions. Or Matt, Lee, Christina, I saw you were on here, Dante's on. If you guys have anything you want to share or bring up, that would be great too. Of course, I don't think anybody will be mad if we bounce early, but. Let's see. Oh yeah, here's a book. Thought I'd taken this slide out. And here's where you can find me if you want to connect with me on any social channels. A lot of you on the call, I know we're already connected, but I would love to see you out in the social world as well. And there we go. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen if I can figure out how to do that. There we go. And get back in here, and I'll take a look at some of the chats too. Lord, yes, please contact Dante about the Medicaid expansion. We are all trying to do that. Your first draft is usually a mess. Welcome to the world, Christina. That is also my challenge. Let's see. Oh, I'm glad. Thank you, Jill. I'm glad this was great. Anything else that we want to talk about? Or Lee, is there anything that you want to let people know is coming down the pike? Or again, just reinforce the invitation to write some letters?
Yeah, so I think I can share, we wanted to take a time just to sort of talk a little bit about sort of like our organizational strategy around some of this stuff and sort of what we're thinking. We are certainly had a lot of plans around doing some in-person advocacy events, trying to be active at the legislature when short session was supposed to start this month. Obviously, sort of those things aren't happening anymore. So one of the things we have been sort of ramping up and wanting to do is taking this as an opportunity to try to sort of tell the stories about the policy interventions we care about, sort of tell the stories about HIV and AIDS in the media space. And, particularly for that being, getting opinion pieces and letters to the editor in our local newspapers. So a couple of sort of ways we've been doing that. We already mentioned during Margot's talk that Dante's helping try to ramp up some stuff specific to Medicaid expansion. The legislature is coming back next week for what is likely to be a very odd short session. We believe and certainly think that Medicaid expansion makes sense as a policy intervention right now. There are so many people who have found themselves in the Medicaid gap, who have lost work. You also have, a real need for ability to access services for COVID testing and for just all kinds of things right now, right? Already Medicaid expansion was a good idea. This pandemic makes it an even more important one. So we're trying to sort of lift that up. I wrote a piece that was in Q Notes, our statewide LGBTQ, to a 1-year deferral. So you could donate blood if you've not engaged in sexual activity for a year, and they just reduced it to 3 months. This could be its own webinar, and I'm sort of happy to talk about that issue for quite a while. But we felt like it was an important time to just feel like that policy is really stigmatizing. We have really excellent testing in place right now for donated blood to test if it is someone's living with HIV who's donating, or if there's something else, another communicable disease we should be concerned about. And it just doesn't make sense. That policy isn't grounded in science anymore. So both wanted to lift up that we thought that step was at least, continues to be a slow improvement, but still sort of insufficient. And additionally, we're working with some of our folks out in the eastern part of North Carolina. Saw Dashita's on the call from Greenville, to keep raising up the just important role the existing Medicaid program has. In the last year, we've really ramped up work to try to talk about why Medicaid as a program is so critical in our state. It's one of the best tools we have to combat COVID, and sort of want to lift that up as well. So we're certainly interested. I saw several people in the chat sort of sharing some of your policy thoughts or topics, and engaging with you in that work. This is not totally formulated yet, but I can share that we are planning to next month kind of work with a cohort of folks in partnership with Margot and maybe some of the other communications professionals we work with, to really do a deep dive into writing advocacy, take a deeper dive than we could necessarily on this call. And really do some one-on-one coaching, but also strategy to make sure that folks get something placed, be it in your local newspaper, be it in a national HIV org, maybe somewhere else. So if that's something that's of interest, I know some folks feel like they have a little more time. I also appreciate that some people feel like their time feels really different and they don't have as much time to be an advocate. But if you would be interested in kind of doing a deeper dive for a couple weeks with us, with the goal of definitely getting something that you wrote that really was vetted and worked with a team on, and that you got published, I'd say let's plan to reach out to Christina on that. So Christina's email is just CHRISTINA. Christina, I didn't plan to spell your name, but I think that was right.
And it's in the chat box.
Perfect. Yeah. So Christina@ncan.org is in the chat box. If that would be of interest, reach out. I think just if you'd share with her your name, where you're from in the state, and maybe, we don't have a formal application process for this, but it'd be helpful to know sort of what you feel passionate about right now, and maybe what you might be interested in lifting up.
I do want to add really quickly, Latoya made a great point about spelling, punctuation, usage, and grammar, which I call SPUG, because that's how it feels. And she's exactly right. Errors can get you rejected. Again, if there's, especially like now where there's a lot of content coming in, they're looking for any reason in the world to say no. One of the things that we also get hung up on while we're writing is getting all of that SPUG stuff right. It does not have to be right in your draft. Do not get slowed down by worrying about any of that in your draft. Your draft is for you. There are a couple, and don't do it like even during revision. Yes, if you find errors, fix them. But you want to write it, put it away, and then come back and proofread it. Preferably read it out loud. That's how I do it. I find tons of errors that I missed reading it in my head. And part of that's because we process what we hear differently than what we see. At least that's what the smarty pants people tell me. So all of that stuff should be at the very end. Latoya's right. Get someone else to read it if you can, just because you know what you're trying to say, and that makes us more likely to miss stuff. There's also a really good app called Grammarly. There's a free version. That's what I use just to back myself up. It catches a lot of things. I don't agree with it on the Oxford comma, but y'all know if you've been around me for any amount of time at all, I don't like the Oxford comma. And I also post in the chat a couple of links to other thoughts I have on spelling, punctuation, usage, and grammar. But that is a terrific point. Just don't worry. It is literally the last thing you need to worry about, because you're going to create errors as you're working on the piece. So put it away and then do that last and look at it only to fix things that are wrong. Okay, now I'll get off my soapbox.
And Margot, I actually have a question from somebody who texted me, I guess was not able to use the chat function. How do you know what's more effective when there's an issue that needs attention, like Medicaid expansion, i.e. like what platform do you use as far as like a blog post, a letter to the editor, a full story, an op-ed? How do you know what is the most effective?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And there's not an easy answer. In an ideal world, we would use all of those platforms, right? Any platform that we own. So our blog, our social media accounts, those are always the easy channels. But that generally means you're speaking only to people you already know. And so you could have a bunch of people you ask to amplify your content so that then the people they know see it because it goes out on their channel. To me, the letter to the editor is always a great place to start, and not because that's an initiative we're trying to do here at NCAN, but it's the smallest piece. And if you are able to distill your thoughts about a topic down into that small a piece, then it's going to be really potent, and you can use it anywhere. 250 words almost always fits in a Facebook or LinkedIn post, in addition to a letter to the editor. I highly recommend looking for advocacy groups and support groups that are with you on these issues and using their channels. But if you're trying to get to people who are not with us, right, which is often our big problem, an opinion essay, if you feel confident in your writing and you know that you have a lot to say, that's a great place to go. And they do not get a lot of those at the papers right now. And again, remember that newspapers, it's not about reading the physical paper. It is about getting out on a searchable database that reaches a lot of people. And that's what the newspaper is going to do for you. So I would say local radio station or local newspaper, to me, would be the places to go if you want to get the broadest reach. But again, having a short piece that you can send that says, I'm worth your time, your airtime, or your space would be better. I think would better serve you in getting their attention. To that, I feel like maybe that got a little rangy, but that's me. And if you want to drop me a note about that, about what your specific topic is and what your goal is, I'm happy to look over that. I'm also happy to just look at if you do work out a P.I.G, I'm happy to look at that as well. So this is obviously really important to me. I grew up on opinion writing and I love it, but what we're doing here at NCAN is really important. And so there are a lot of reasons I want to be supportive. Christina, I just have to say, like, I don't know where you are, but that's the best background ever. Anything else we can help you guys with today? Maybe not.
Oh, I have one.
Okay.
So, like right now around this time, we're going to be indoors more. So we're going to be, of course, wanting to be productive or whatever. But I've noticed that the stress of these times have definitely impacted my mental fatigue. And especially when it comes to writing, I have a lot of ideas, but actually like thinking through them, it kind of like feels very stressful at times. And there will be times where I feel like I get writer's block or whatever.
Yep.
So I don't know if there are strategies to kind of combat that, or tricks, or.
Here's what I do. I take that little, the information part of the P.I.G and just do a T-chart. What's the most important thing I think I want people to know? What are some facts that support, or some information that supports that? Just so I can start kind of writing it down. And you can do a ton of those because it's super fast. Right? So you just say, like, let me get this out of my head and onto a piece of paper. Again, I think doing paper, I didn't get back to that. I think doing this on paper is really important, y'all, because it slows your brain down. And right now, that's a big thing that we need, right? We are all just like, woo! So getting out a piece of paper, drawing a T on it, main idea, support, and then just jotting down, again, in bullet points. Don't try to write right now. Just try to, like, give your brain some room. I've been doing that a ton. And then once you find, out of all of those T-charts, if you find something you want to get, you really want to lean into, then you can fill out the rest of the form or just start writing, right? But to me, that's right now, that is such a great point, Christina. My intellectual processing is not super good. And so just slowing myself down on a piece of paper and like, okay, right, I do have this, or, oh, this felt like a good idea and it's a terrible idea. I don't have enough support for this or whatever. So I think that's a huge thing to do right now, especially on stuff that's important and big. Mm-hmm. Our brains are just overloaded. Yeah. And one more thing, you guys, if you in your community would like to have this workshop, someday we'll be able to go out again and I would be happy to come to you. But I can also obviously do this. So if you would like this workshop, again, I offer it for free I am happy to come in person or virtually to wherever you are. So thanks for coming today. I really appreciate your being here and carving out some time.
Well, before we officially close, if I could make just a couple more announcements. So yeah, if folks are interested in really doing a deeper dive with us and workshopping and getting an opinion piece written in the next month, the sort of focus on that's going to be in May, please reach out. Christina at incan.org will make your sort of point of contact with that. Just share your name, helpful to know where you're from in the state, and if there's a particular topic you're interested in jumping into. Matt has shared the link in the chat for next week's webinar. As we mentioned, that's going to be a look at some issues around reproductive rights and freedom. NC AIDS Action Network signed on to a Supreme Court amicus brief in a case related to access to contraception. And we're going to have two lawyers from the Center for Health Research at Harvard School of Law presenting, along with hearing from a local staff member from the Planned Parenthood affiliate here in North Carolina, sort of talk about broader issues of reproductive freedom right now. So registration is in the chat for that. I am also going to share one request we're making to everybody in our network. We, on Monday, released a letter specifically going to the House Health Committee on some priority policy issues related to COVID, hits on a couple important things to our community, issues around voting rights, some issues about unemployment, a request that, voting rights be considered and that we increase access to voting by mail in the November election, a wonky issue about notary access that I know our attorney friends at the Duke School of Health or the Duke the advocacy group at the Duke Law School feels really passionate about and is challenging for folks living with HIV right now. So would love folks to sign that letter. If you haven't, please share that with your networks, post it on social media. We're taking sign-ons for the next 2 days and then are gonna electronically deliver that to the General Assembly next week. And finally, just a quick tease, we are putting our schedule together for May to continue our weekly webinars. First week of May, we're going to have what I think is going to be a really interesting dialogue about sort of how sex, how sexuality, how intimacy is changing in COVID, and sort of hear from some experts from that space. And then 2 Thursdays in May are going to be working with some of our national partners, again, to talk about the role of Medicaid and how Medicaid is so important to the COVID response. So hope folks will continue to join us for those. Again, Matt dropped the link for next week's registration in the chat, and we'll send that out with the slides and the video recording this afternoon. So we just got 2 minutes left. So final comments, final thoughts?
I just want to say I'm grateful for you guys for doing, for both the folks at NCAN and for all the advocates and allies on the call. This is how we get things done, and staying focused on the change we want to see and the opinions that we want people to have and the information they need is really important. And so you're showing up today is a really important action that you're taking, and I really appreciate it.
Cool. Well, with that, we will let everybody go. Enjoy your Thursday. Thanks so much, and hopefully we'll see you next Thursday at 10 a.m. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Be well.